As probably every single one of you has seen already, but if you haven't, here's your announcement. There was a new ban list yesterday, and it goes into effect very soon, actually just on Monday, February 5th. And in today's video, I want to talk about 5 rogue decks that I think will be good, not only in this month, but for the foreseeable future. And one of the things that I would want to mention before I get into the actual list is that there are some changes on the ban list that won't directly impact the decks that I'm going to talk about in the way that they're going to give support to the decks, but there is some impacts where these decks don't have to face ridiculous cards. What I mean by this is that every single deck in the game benefits from not having to go second against a field of Spiral Resort, Spiral Last Resort, and Spiral Sleeper. Every single deck benefits off of that, not just the ones on this list, so I'm not going to mention that for every single deck that I talk about. Now, I will say that in general, the decks that play a lot of trap cards will benefit more from that because Sleeper was so good against those strategies, and that'll sort of come into play with 2 of the strategies that I talk about on this list. And also, with the Magician hits, the deck is a lot less consistent, which means that Ash Blossom is a lot better against that deck than it was. And I know that that might sound like a weird thing, but without the hits to Magicians, without the Iris Magician hit, and without the Skullcrobat Joker hit, one of the problems with that deck in the foreseeable future was that it would have been like the only deck that didn't just or that could search more than any other deck in the format, because with all those search cards there was nothing good to Ash Blossom, and that meant if there's one deck that Ash Blossom doesn't work against and then 100 decks that Ash Blossom is really good against, well then that one deck is going to be a lot more successful. So I think that the Magician hits are really helpful because it makes Ash Blossom actually matter a lot more, which is pretty good. But anyway, let's get into the list. So these aren't in a real particular order. I think they're all about the same level of powerfulness going forward here, but we'll talk about them in an order nonetheless. So the first one that I talked about is Lightsworns. Now, why are Lightsworns so good? Well, Lightsworns do come off on the list in that they get Damage Juggler back and they have triple BLS. Also, they're just good in general. I feel like on every single ban list update where people talk about good rogue decks, Zombie Sworns and regular Lightsworns seem to pop up in discussion. They have a ton of really powerful cards that usually avoid getting hit on the ban list, and they are a little more inconsistent than most of the other rogue decks out there, but they're very, very powerful and have the potential to do some pretty crazy openings. And I think Damage Juggler, it probably won't find its way into a ton of different strategies when it's out 1 copy per deck, because part of the charm, part of the cool part about Damage Juggler was the fact that you could discard it from your hand, and then that really only worked when you had like 3 copies available. But with 1 copy available, Lightsworns can make use of it very well, and also Lightsworns can easily make Psyframe Lord Omega, which can put back Damage Juggler. And I think that that's where Damage Juggler is the most quote-unquote unfair, is when you can recycle it every single turn, and Zombie Sworns and regular Lightsworns are really the deck that's built to make Omega, and multiple Omegas at that matter, on the first turn, so you can take advantage of that Damage Juggler search every single turn. And they can make use of not only the Trick Clown, but also the Hat Tricker, which I think makes them a prime candidate for playing Damage Juggler. So Lightsworn is a good deck going forward, as it always will be, unless like a million things get hit on it. I also think that for number 4, I guess, stun decks in general. Now, we haven't really had a lot of stun decks in a while, but if you noticed on this ban list, we had triple Bottomless Trap Hole, we had triple Trento Tribute, we have triple Thunder King, and also we just got the new Inspector border, which I'm sure many of you have seen, but if you haven't already, that card is incredibly versatile, and it just completely locks your opponent out of the game, and that's great for stun decks. And I think with all these new tools, stun decks could be kind of viable. Now, I use the word stun deck pretty loosely here, but I'm basically just thinking of any deck that plays sort of all these trap cards and Inspector border and probably Thunder King. I think that we could maybe even see this deck play artifacts, and at that point we're pretty close to like a hat deck. Now, I don't know if Trap Tricks monsters are going to be good even with 3 Bottomless Trap Hole. I think they're interesting at the very least, but I think a stun deck that played Trap Tricks monsters and all these traps maybe could be viable, or it's a different engine. It doesn't have to be the Trap Tricks monsters, but you need to find some engine to play these cards. A lot of people have been talking about Clifforts. I don't think that deck is that good. It's not going to make my list, at least, mainly because Clifforts really take a heavy hit from having the pendulum zones in the back row, because now they can't have 2 scales and 5 back row. They can only have 2 scales and 3 back row, and one of those 3 back row is going to be Sacrifice, so it's really just 2 defensive cards, and I don't think that's good enough. But maybe Clifforts are going to fall into this stun category, and they might be kind of viable. I don't think they're going to be that good though. But anyway, moving on. Number 3, I think you all were expecting this, maybe higher on the list, but once again, I said the numbers don't really matter too much, but FAs. I think FAs are awesome. I think FAs are even not that terrible right now, as in this weekend, but when these cards on Spirals and Magician sides all get hit, FAs are going to be crazy. I mean, I know I've sort of hyped up this deck already, but it is very powerful, and it's very hard to play, but it rewards players that spend the time to learn the combos, and not everyone wants to learn the combos, but I think right now, with this new list, they're going to be pretty darn good as a rogue contender. Probably not the best deck. They still are a little too normal summon reliant, and they're also kind of inconsistent, but they're decently consistent. They're more consistent than you probably think they are if you build them right, but they're not like the most consistent deck. And I think that when we get the next set especially, FAs have a huge potential to be good. If the 4 cards in the next set are as good as the 4 cards in this set, FAs will be crazy this summer, but we'll have to wait and see for that. But for just right now, I think this deck actually is good, and it's pretty much what I'm looking to play for the rest of this month until the next set comes out. The next thing that I want to talk about is the dinosaur strategy. Now, dinosaurs have already been popping up at regional qualifiers and even at YCSs over the past couple months, despite the fact that we have full power Spirals and despite the fact that we have full power Magicians. Well, Spirals aren't, I guess, full power, but they're good, obviously. They're still the best deck, even with all those hits that they took to them. But despite all that stuff, dinosaurs have popped up at a lot of tournaments, and that's just because Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is a very powerful card, even against some of those crazy strategies, because it can take apart boards pretty easily. We also still have 3 Dragonic Diagram. Now, we don't have Lithosagam, which I think is a huge downside for dinosaurs, but in general, dinosaurs have been able to maintain their relevance as a rogue deck, even with one Miscellaneous Source and even without Lithosagam. So I think that when we get the new card that is legal as of yesterday, the I don't even know how you pronounce it, Vortex, I don't know, the new dinosaur card that came out in Extreme Force, that card is incredible. It searches the special summon spell card. It's really good. It's an on-field negation for spells and traps, and also destroys your baby Ceresaurus. That card's insane, and I think that dinosaurs, because of that card and because of the hits to Spiral, now suddenly become a lot bigger force in competition. But I think people already kind of knew that because people were still playing them. Now, number 1, and I do think this one is like the number 1 winner on the list in terms of rogue decks, and that is Frogs. Now, I just posted a Frog profile, so make sure to go check that out if you don't know what I'm talking about. But Frogs play like a stun deck, except better, like in almost every case. Now, they can't really play Inspector Border, and they can only sort of play Thunder King, but Totally Awesome, backed by 4 or 5 trap cards, is ridiculous. And one of the huge benefits that Frogs get from this list is not only the fact that you don't have to go against Spiral Sleeper, which I talked about at the beginning of the video, but in the case of Frogs, it is so important, because Frogs literally could not beat Spirals going second. And also, sometimes if they went first, what would happen, and this is coming from someone who played Frogs at 3 events where Spirals were illegal, a lot of times you wouldn't have the Dust Tornado out to the Spiral Resort, but you would have Paleozoic Canadia. So what happened is your opponent would activate Resort, you wouldn't have a way to stop it, and then every time they summon a monster, well, you couldn't Paleozoic Canadia it because they couldn't be targeted, which puts you at a huge disadvantage. But also, now that we have Bottomless Trap Hole, it means that we have 3 more really powerful normal trap cards that you can trigger the Paleozoic effects off of. Because one of the problems with Solemn Warning and Solemn Strike was that they don't trigger the Paleozoics, but they're obviously too good to cut, and in this case, you'll now get to play Solemn Judgment on top of all this stuff, which seems like a pretty crazy board. I mean, really imagine a situation where you have Totally Awesome, Solemn Judgment, and Bottomless Trap Hole. That seems pretty good, and Bottomless Trap Hole is really well positioned because of how good it is against Pendulums. I think Pendulums, for the most part, are going to be the best deck coming out of this list, which I know sounds crazy because they got Iris Band and they got Skullcrobat Joker Band, but you can still do some pretty crazy combos with Heavy Metamorphose or Electromite. It's just not like as consistent as it used to be, and it's not going to be like tier 0 or anything. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's still going to be a good deck, and Frogs can play against that. They can also play Unending Nightmare, and I know that there's Hey Trunade, and that's obviously an issue, but you can play cards like Totally Awesome to negate that Hey Trunade. And if you want to also hit like Evenly Matched, you could play Mind Crush. Now, you're probably not going to Mind Crush a Hate Trunade, but you definitely can Mind Crush and Evenly Match, and then use your Toad effect, not to just negate the Evenly Match, but to negate the Hate Trunade. So then your opponent is down to only a couple cards in their hand because you've taken one out of their hand, stolen the other one, and I think that's pretty good. I think Frogs are very well positioned going forward, and I think that that is probably my number 1 rogue pick. Let me know what you guys think about my list. Let me know if I was right or wrong. I'm sure it'll be funny to look at this video like in a month and see if I was correct or not. But I do think these are all solid picks going forward, and I'll see you guys later. And I'm very, very excited for this month. I think it's going to be an awesome month for Yu-Gi-Oh! And if we look at the upcoming packs, not a lot of them have a ton of broken cards in them. So I think that we're going to be looking at several months of really fun Yu-Gi-Oh! With a bunch of decks being viable. And that's my favorite format, or that's my favorite type of format. We saw that happen in 2014, a little bit in 2016, and now I think we're going to see it in 2018. So I think I've rambled on long enough. I'll see you guys later. Bye.